Kara, thanks for joining us. I have Kara Miles here. She's a accounting major at Ohio State University. She's a current senior, and she is working this summer with PwC in the audit sector during her internship. Welcome. Let's start things
Yeah.
off. Tell me why PricewaterhouseCoopers.
So going through all of the interview process, a lot of what people kind of tell you, and they'll tell you this at all four at the Big Four, that the reason why they chose their specific company is the people. And I think, again, like as cliche as it sounds, it's true. So I did a lot of research on PwC and all of the companies, and the work they do is very similar. Each office kind of differs city to city. But when I went to Philadelphia to visit all of the offices, I really liked all the people. I liked the atmosphere. I kind of liked the culture of the company. And I thought that PwC does a lot of great things and has a lot of just cool initiatives. They have a Be Well, Work Well initiative, a diversity and inclusion initiative, and just all of like their programs and how they focus on their employees is something that I really appreciated and is a big reason of why I chose it.
What's Be Well, Work Well at PwC?
So they have a initiative that they call Be Well Work Well, and it basically just tries to promote their employees doing like a work-life balance. So giving people that flexibility of if they need to work from home to kind of work and still have families or be healthy. So there's some teams that they'll take every 5 minutes out of the hour and just do like 10 push-ups or go walk around the office or just kind of small things to promote more like active lifestyles and more just healthy work-life balances.
No, totally cool. So how did you, well, a question I want to ask is you mentioned previously that these big four companies were always asking, do you have 150 hours in order to get your CPA? Can you tell me a little bit more about what that is and what that's about?
Yeah, so the CPA is a certified public accountant. It's an exam that a lot of people in Big Four careers take, and a lot of Big Four companies will pay for it. So they'll pay for your exam registration and your study materials, which is the equivalent of like thousands of dollars. So it's very worth it. And you can't advance to, I think it's a manager level at any of these companies without the CPA certification. And it basically, you need 150 credit hours to take this exam. So you can do it in however kind of many years works for you. So for me personally, I came in with enough credits from high school that transferred that I'm doing 4 years of 2 semesters and I'll graduate with exactly 150 credit. But it's very common for students in accounting to do the master's in accounting program, which will do 5 years
Okay.
or just take 5 years of classes. The good news about the 150 credits is you don't need like a specific focus in anything. You just need to have 150 credits. So you can take like golf or beer and wine and it doesn't matter. It's the same credits in their eyes.
No, it's really cool. But it is specific, the internship specific, right? It's set up in sectors. How many sectors are there?
Yeah, so a lot of the Big Four companies, they have three different sectors. Advisory is their more consulting. So if you want to do like management consulting, technology consulting, you're going to go into more advisory. And then the other two are more accounting focused. So that's audit and tax. So advisory is a whole separate like interview process. I didn't go through any of that, so I can't speak on it. But assurance and tax are relatively the same. So I specifically applied to the assurance program, which is assurance audit, and tax is very similar, but you have to make that distinguish between the two when you're applying.
So why audit for you specifically? Why was it so interesting or compelling?
So I chose audit. I actually had a conversation before I did all of the recruiting, and I was talking with someone who worked at PwC in Philly, and he said, if you want to go, because I didn't, he explained all of that to me, and he
Yeah.
said, if you want to go working in tax is great, but tax, you're very limited in your scope of who you're working with. So if I'm working at tax at PwC, then I would only be working with the tax groups in the companies that I'm working for and with the tax managers versus if I'm doing audit, I'm working more with the broad scope of the company. So auditing, you're auditing all the financial statements. So because you're working with all the financial statements, every different department is playing a role in that. So you have a lot more face time with different VPs of the company and kind of more influential people and just a broader holistic view of the company. So I was convinced for that I would just get more experience and have a bigger view of what I was doing in certain industries when I was auditing them.
Perfect. You mentioned that we were discussing like why we think you were so unique, and you said you had kind of three different areas. One was your club, another one was your visit to South Africa, and of course your minor. Can you explain more of what those were and how you got involved in those areas?
Yeah, so I tried to going through the recruiting process, a bunch of, like I mentioned before, everyone is accounting students. So as an accounting student, you have to find a way to separate yourself as not just another accounting student. So for me, I really want to work abroad in the future. I don't really know when and if or how. I'll figure that out more. Kind of, I think PwC has a lot of international opportunities. So I did something I found out through STEP, which is something a lot of Ohio State sophomores have access to with their $2,000. I looked into different like global experiences and stumbled upon Fisher's consulting firm, did more research, found out that I could go to Cape Town, South Africa and work in a social enterprise or work for a social enterprise in an incubator there doing nonprofit work for 2 weeks. So I applied, ended up getting it and going to South Africa in May after my sophomore year. Working there for 2 weeks was something that I really could talk about in an internship interview because I had experience working with teams. It was global experience. There's a lot of struggles working globally with different kind of business relationships and working with specifically South Africans. They handle business a lot more kind of not lackadaisical, but more relationship based.
Okay.
So for example, if I walked into a meeting in South Africa and said, okay, like let's just get right down to business, they would not trust me. You have to build a relationship. So you'll sit down and be like, how's your family? How's this going? Or talk about very personal stuff. And then they'll start to trust you and do business. So having a unique experience like that kind of allows me to step back and put things into perspective and understand that, not everyone handles interactions with people a certain way. So that was something I used that I thought made me stand out. A lot of recruiters always pointed to the Cape Town, South Africa. We're like, oh, tell me about the time you worked in South Africa. Another thing that separated me that I thought was I'm an analytics minor. So I chose that purposefully when I did accounting because I knew that Big Four in accounting played very well with analytics, and analytics right now is a buzzword, but it's also kind of more of the future. So it's a very hot topic in accounting because it's changing a lot of what accountants do, specifically auditors. So what I learned through just talking to people and going through the recruitment process is analytics is allowing auditors to test more and more data than they would be able to test before.
Yeah.
Because if they test like a small population, then they can automatically just roll it out to all of the population and use the analytics to kind of measure like the comparisons between them. And then the last thing, I am very involved in a business fraternity on campus called PGN and have been with it since the beginning. So founding that, going from 4 to 54, I used a lot of my experiences working in a team, both good and bad. And we were actually going through, when I was doing interviews, we were going through the recruitment process for PGN.
Yeah.
So every week they did one of the common interview questions like, tell me about a time you struggled in a team. Tell me about a time this. And I was always like, oh, well, yesterday I was working in a team and this happened. So it was a very relevant experience because it was always changing and very applicable. But that was something that I think helped me going back to what I was saying before about South Africa. PwC and a lot of the other Big Four companies really don't test your hard skills or like how well they have their GPA cut off. And I think it's a 3.2 for most places. So it's still competitive, but they understand that like everyone has these basic qualifications and they're looking more for the soft skills for the team. Someone actually said to me, yeah, pick a place where you want to spend like 80 hours a week with these people. Like you don't want them to kind of be duds. So making sure you could actually just carry a conversation and talk about like a time you could accurately or not accurately, but handle a situation in a team and just be a team player or a team leader and not be that person that's just an individual person. And that was a huge like emphasis that they put on their recruiting process was very much teamwork.
I think the silver lining there is that we shouldn't wait until someone pats us on the back to say, hey, you should be a leader. Just start that now. And I think in your example, you actually created this club. How did you go about creating the club? Because it's not an easy task. So can you tell me like how you came about creating it and then like the trials and tribulations that it took?
So going in, I'm actually an out-of-state student who went to Ohio State. So going in my freshman year, everyone tells you the same thing, get involved, get involved, get involved. And it kind of sounds like a broken record.
Yeah.
And that's true to some extent. Like you have to get involved. But I wasn't super involved my freshman year, so I was just in club field hockey. But I knew that, hey, I wasn't involved freshman year, but I can't keep doing that. Like I need something to fill my time. I need something to do. And I liked the idea of business fraternities. So they have 3 pillars. They have a social, philanthropy, and a professional pillar to them. So you're doing work in all 3 with the same organization. And I personally really liked that. I thought that was something I wanted to be a part of. And I hadn't quite found my home in any of the other ones that existed on Ohio State's campus. And flash forward a couple of months, I was talking to some of my friends who had similar feelings, and we joked, like, let's start a business frat. And after having a more serious conversation later, we decided we can actually do it. Like, let's do it. There's a need for it. We reached out to some of my friends are in PGN at different schools, and I reached out to their nationals and said, hey, we're interested in starting a chapter. They got back to us and said, Ohio State is a school we'd love to have a chapter at. Put us in contact with a different Ohio State student who also wanted to start a chapter. So we met up with him, and there was 4 of us at that point, and we said, we're going to do this. So that was beginning of my sophomore year. By the end of fall semester sophomore year, we had a class of like 30 people. We initiated at the end of my sophomore year with 25. I was elected president, and I've been president since doing that. So that's a lot of teamwork experience, but you don't have to. I would say to a lot of people, granted, I did that, and through my time here, like, I was president of 2 organizations, but they don't look for leadership experience as just like a president. They want leadership experience of just like an actively involved member. So if your leadership experience is like a social chair or director of certain committee, that's okay too, but they don't want to just see like active member, because it's easy to be an active member of some clubs, but they want to see that you're actually like kind of getting involved and taking initiative to start something.
Yeah, if you can actually quantify your success, then I think that goes above and beyond than being an active member, or just being a member. And I think that's huge, and definitely kudos to you. You also mentioned how you actually recruited. So I would love to help out these students, like, so, because they're always like, well, we have to be an official organization, etc. At first, you weren't an official organization. So what did you do? How did you market your club to go from 4 to 30?
So you have to be a student organization for 2 semesters on campus before you can apply to be an official organization. But there's a lot of ways to go around Fisher. And like the organizations, if you talk to, one of the things we did was we actually talked to Lorraine Pennyman, who's the head of ULEO, and she put us in This Week in Schoenbaum's under university announcements. So a lot of it is just marketing. We targeted like group me's of social sororities and fraternities because it was easy for us to put people in there. We reached out to honors and scholars members and put it in their newsletters. And what we did was just use our connections to put it in as many newsletters as we could. And then from there, a lot of people brought friends. So if one person heard about it, they're like, hey, come check this out with me. And then we would have like 3 more people come with them. So I think our initial like interest meeting, we had 60 people, but we were very transparent about the fact that like, this is new, this will be a lot of work. And I think that's a deterrent for some people, which is fine. Like, everyone has their certain thing they want to belong to, and it doesn't matter what it is as long as it's something. So find what you're passionate about, find what you're okay to spend your time doing, and if you find that, then just go for it.
No, absolutely. Let's switch focus into the actual interview process. So what does that look like with Big Four traditionally?
So you have, for each Big Four, they start, I think the very first event I went to was like August 20 something. It was the first week of school. By the time I got my offer and accepted it, I think it was around October 18th. So from that entire span, I was just doing interviews. But they start off all tabling on the Fisher Courtyard. So every Big Four has a day that they'll table. And I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but it's on Handshake and you can find out. And say Monday was PwC. They would have a table with just a bunch of PwC people. Sometimes there's like free merch. I know EY gave out like Comfort Colors t-shirts and they were a huge hit. But they have just a bunch of people there. And I would just walk up and I'd be like, hi, my name's Kara. Like, I'm really interested in PwC. Can you tell me more about X? And I would just pick a different topic every time. So can you tell me about what you do? Can you tell me about how you like the company? Can you tell me about, a lot of times it was just like basic kind of get to know you questions, like where are you from? What's your major? Will you graduate in 4 years with 150, or like when will you graduate? That's a big question. It comes up a lot. And then just kind of general conversation about what I was doing in classes. The good news about Ohio State is they bring in a lot of like former Ohio State kids, so you can bond over classes and what they've taken. But just getting to kind of ask, for lack of a better word, your stupid questions to all the people that are just like associates and they're not the ones interviewing you. It's very informal. And that's all the tabling that they have on the Fisher Courtyard. From there, they have applications on Handshake that you apply to, and every one I think had like 3 applications. So they'd have the application on Handshake, the application on their general website, and like a special like Ohio State like student distinguisher, because Ohio State is considered a feeder school for a lot of Big Four, which I didn't know, but I found that out. So from there you applied, and then after you applied, you found out if you got a first round interview or not. If you did, that was on campus in like the Gerlach rooms, but then there was a pre-interview night before that. So if your interview was on a Wednesday, your pre-interview night was Thursday or Tuesday night. each company did the pre-interview nights a little differently. So
Okay.
EY my year rented out the top of the shoe, and they had everyone up there for just drinks, or not drinks, like just drinks and snacks, like
Yeah,
not alcohol.
yeah.
And everyone just talked about, what's their favorite part of EY, and they had stadium tours. So there was something to kind of talk about and do. It was a lot of people's first time in the stadium, so that was a big talking point. Deloitte just had like a ballroom and just rented it out and just had like apps, and you got to meet your actual interviewers. So they told you your interviewers' names before Deloitte.
Ooh.
And then I actually talked with my interviewers at the pre-interview night. So I got to know them before. PwC had a pre-interview night that gave a lot of information about their company. So about their Be Well, Work Well initiative, about their 5 professional development, blanking on the exact wording of them.
That's fine.
But they talked a lot about their company. And then KPMG did it at B-Dubs, Buffalo Wild Wings, and it was very casual. It was like eat wings, just talk. So it gives you a chance to get out your pre-interview nerves, ask your last minute, if you want to call them stupid questions that you don't want to ask in an interview, and overall, like, just calm yourself. And then they did first round interviews. After that, they're all in Columbus, regardless of what office you want to choose, because you get to preference your offices. So you preference like your 1, 2, 3. And then after that, you'll have, if you get a second round interview, they'll do a second round interview via Skype or via like Google Hangouts with the home office. So I did it with Philadelphia with all of them and got to Skype people. They were all different. So for PwC, it was more informal at that point. It was just more asking questions, talking about my resume. And then Deloitte, same thing. KPMG, I don't remember the second interview. And then EY was just with a recruiter because they had like technical difficulties with me because of like Ohio and the timing of everything. But they're all very transparent about where you are in the process and, hey, your interview's this week, you should hear by the end of this week, and you had contacts. As far as the interviews themselves, it's a lot of behavioral questions. So it's a lot of teamwork questions. It's a lot of tell me about a time when. Also kind of walking through my biggest advice that I give to people, not just going through Big Four, but anyone, is know your resume inside and out, and don't put anything on your resume that you're not prepared to tell a story about, because it's very easy for a recruiter to transparently kind of see through what you're bullshitting on your resume and what you're not. So if you're going to put, like dog walker, volunteer, or started something, like you better actually have done it and not lied about it.
Right. And prepare a story for it as well. That's somewhat compelling so that it makes sense. Because everything you have in your resume has to have a reason. It's a selling point. It's a talking point. Making sure you're prepared in that regard. No, that's really cool. How did you prepare for the interview? Like, where did you find this information that there were behavioral questions, etc.?
So the internet is your best friend. And I did a lot of research. There's Big Four accounting, like Reddit forums that I went on and did some research. So they'll have kind of tips about like, have you heard back, or like, have you gotten your first round interview? And then also just like questions they ask, as well as like Glassdoor. That's kind of a common one. You can see reviews, salaries. Salaries, I would say, vary, and you're not really going to know them. I didn't ask about salaries in any of my interviews, and they weren't very forthcoming about it. So I think that's kind of something that you should steer clear from. Might be not in other interviews, but I know it was never mentioned in any of mine. And then I just looked up some basic like interview questions. I did a lot of research on the companies themselves in their specific company websites. So like I mentioned before, I was an analytics minor. So I always Googled like PwC analytics and found like what they were doing for analytics. PwC has a digital incubator. My goal was to find stuff that was going to kind of set me apart. So someone's advice to me doing the interview process was find something old, find a current news story that's kind of like Google PwC news, and then look for a recent article of like something that you can show you're keeping up with the company, and then look for something about the company that you like. So I focused on analytics a lot, that I looked into their analytics software and kind of talked with a lot of people about how that was changing the audit. And for me, that was a successful, I think, talking point, because then that could relate back to accounting. They'd see my business analytics minor and it was all relevant. And I also looked for a lot of work-life balance initiatives that they took. So I know PwC has their Be Well, Work Well, but I did a lot of research on that and asked people, how do you do like a work-life balance when you're in such a demanding career? How does the company make up for it? Or I see the company has this initiative, like, can you tell me more about it? So kind of having small tidbits, like you don't need a lot for every company, for each one you're going through, and this kind of applies to everything. Find 3 things that you can talk about. So if one comes up naturally in conversation, you still have 2 more to talk about, and find them specific enough where someone's not going to mention it without being prompted, if that makes sense. So if it's like PwC's big selling point, have something else besides that because naturally they're going to sell like their Be Well, Work Well.
No, that's interesting. So you're digging in deep in that regard. So what are some of the things that you would say when you met with these individuals, whether it be tabling or not? Clearly, you mentioned that you would talk about the analytics, the work-life balance initiative as well. Is there anything else that you kind of took outside the box a little bit to kind of separate yourself between competition?
I would say make it personal. So, with a lot of the people you'll meet at different recruiting events are associate, but if you're making it personal to those people, then I had one girl, her name was Lauren Johnson, and her and I talked about Deloitte's soccer team for like their rec soccer team for like 20 minutes. And it was just a conversation about like, she's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, like I gotta go. We have a soccer team, and she's telling me all about it. And then two people from Deloitte's, I think Columbus office, were like going to travel to Spain to play soccer. She was telling me all about like this intramural soccer league, which it's it's a big part of her experience there, but it was a very small tidbit that you'd never be able to find like Googling Deloitte US.
Right.
So learning about something like that and then going into interviews later, you're just talking about funny things and like making it more personal stories. So it doesn't really have to be like necessarily about auditing or about like what you're doing, but just having like meaningful connections. And I know like another time when I was interviewing for PwC, my interviewer was late. So I was sitting in like the lobby of Gerlach with the greeters and we were talking about fire drills. And they were telling me how like they had a fire drill at their office and it was poorly managed. And they're like, if there were to be an actual fire at like PwC's office, like we probably would all die because they're like, they just didn't do it right. And we were just talking about like funny times that like fire alarms have gone off. So I was telling a story about a fire alarm going off when I lived in the dorms because I took too steamy of a shower and my interviewer walked out and she was like, oh, great story. So then like right away you kind of have like that personal connection. And we were talking about that spun into kind of like intruder drills and workplace drills and workplace violence. And then she was telling me all about PwC in Dallas had the employee. Do you remember like the cop in Dallas that shot the African American man in his apartment because the cop thought it was her apartment?
That's right. Yep, I do remember.
So he was a PwC employee.
Oh, wow.
And that came up in my interview. And she was like, I feel like PwC is my family because I like felt the loss of him, even though I didn't even know him. But she's like, the whole PwC community felt it. So having like those random one-off stories, for me, I always tell people like that comment from her because that stuck in my mind. And that was another reason like I chose PwC because she was telling me like, it's a whole family, even though I didn't even know this guy in Houston or Dallas. I don't remember which Texas city. But having like those personal conversations, those are the ones you're going to remember more than like, I get in the office and I do auditing and I do this, because a lot of it going back before, like it's about the people and the connections, and a job's a job anywhere, but creating the company and like creating yourself as an interesting candidate and a person. It's the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's huge. And it makes you extremely memorable because you can't forget
Mhm.
those stories. People love hearing those stories.
Exactly.
So you were mixing and mingling with a lot of these big four people. You said your sophomore year through leadership conferences. Can you tell me more about that?
So I actually didn't do a leadership conference, but I would suggest it to people that want to do it. I wasn't sure. You do the recruiting for that in the spring semester of your sophomore year.
Okay.
So at that point, I still wasn't sure which part of like Big Four, if Big Four, that I wanted to go into. And I always tell people the earlier you know, the better, because the more you can do. There's a lot of freshman year experiences they offer. So like Deloitte has an alternative spring break. EY has a first year experience. I don't know if KPMG has anything. And then PwC has a bunch of just random things that I'm blanking on right now. But then going in your spring semester sophomore year, you can apply for leadership conferences. So if you know that you want an internship after your junior year, I would suggest applying for a leadership conference because it makes it a little bit easier. There's not as many people applying for it. And that leadership conference, you apply for it your spring semester sophomore year. If you were to interview and get it, you would do a 2-day leadership conference in the city that you want to work in. So for me, I would have done it in Philadelphia, and you just meet a bunch of other potential candidates, do like games, you get to learn more about the company, the culture, you get to kind of pick which service line you want to do. And then at the end of that 2-day conference is an interview basically for the internship. So you can walk out of the leadership conference after your sophomore year with an interview or an internship offer in hand for the summer after.
Which is huge. But then not only that, I mean, as we know, when we were freshmen and sophomore, it's like we didn't know what we wanted to do. So going to these leadership conferences really gives you a clearer picture of what the company's about. It's not only them interviewing you, but you interviewing them. Is this what you want to do? I think that's critical. Just apply, get into it, and then if you do it and you dislike it, you then realize, accounting's not for me, auditing's not for me in that regard, and you can then find another track within those sectors.
Yeah, so we mentioned this before, but I was doing a Deloitte Early ID program for business technology, like consulting, and I ended up just getting matched with a buddy, had lunch with him a couple times to talk about that. He was like, "Oh, I'll help you prep for these case interviews." Throughout the whole summer and learning about what he did, our kind of mentee-mentor relationship, I realized it wasn't something I wanted to pursue. So he put me in contact with someone who was in audit, who was still at Deloitte that I could then talk to. But having those connections like internally in the company are really nice because it was someone that wasn't a recruiter that was vouching for me to someone else. And also just getting to meet like as many people as possible to get the best picture of what the company is for you. Like not even for kind of like the girl that I talked to never vouched for me in the internship process or anything, but she was a very good person to talk to get to learn more about like what the company was like and a picture of what she was doing on a daily basis. Or one of the questions too, I don't know if I mentioned this, I always ask people what their least favorite part of the company was, because everyone always talks about what their best, like their favorite part is, and like what's your least favorite part, because no one ever talks about the bad stuff, but no one's going to sit there and say I love my job completely, there's nothing I would change. So people would be careful in what they would say, but it was always interesting to see like what people hated and what people were real about with, this is not a glamorous part of the job, but it is.
But you can also take a nugget, right, and then you almost utilize it for, what's really interesting with this company is that, they're maybe not so strong in this area, but they're actually improving it in this specific way. Because everyone says something that they don't like, but they also will back that up with, but you know what, they're improving, and that's the most important thing. And I think it's about being honest. And if you knew that insider, somewhat information that everyone gripes about, I think would be huge. It's like, oh my gosh, this person's a perfect fit. So I think that makes it very interesting. So cool. And I think the key nugget here is like start early and then find out if this is for you. And then if you do start early, then the chances of you being a perfect fit are definitely there. So, well, Kara, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic. I'm so excited for you. Can't believe I'm talking to someone that had 4 offers from all Big Four. And good luck this summer with PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
You too.
All right, bye.